ongoing missions and operations, the NATO defense planning process, and the implementation path for a multi-domain-enabled alliance by 2030. We actively discussed the NATO capability targets and that they will lead to a more even distribution of capabilities. European nations and Canada will develop capabilities that now only the US has. But this meeting was certainly not about NATO alone. For the first time ever, we had military leaders from 26 NATO partner countries and the European Union at the table. The countries that were represented were Algeria, Armenia, Australia, Austria, Azerbaijan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Colombia, Egypt, Georgia, Iraq, Ireland, Israel, Japan, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Malta, Moldova, Mongolia, Morocco, New Zealand, Qatar, Republic of Korea, Serbia, Switzerland, Tunisia, and Ukraine. We have so many stars at the headquarters this week, we're practically a galaxy. What this meeting shows is that NATO and its partners around the globe are growing closer every day. We all see that Russia's war against Ukraine has global repercussions, and that there are no signs that the Kremlin is preparing for peace. President Putin has put the Russian economy on a war footing, and Russia is cooperating more and more closely with China, Iran, and North Korea. NATO is also deeply concerned about the role that China plays in international security. China's military-industrial base is growing and actively supporting the Russian military-industrial complex. And China is rapidly expanding its military arsenal, including nuclear, without any form of transparency. NATO has explicitly said to China, you cannot have it both ways. China cannot, on the one hand, say it wants to maintain good relations with the West and claim to uphold the UN Charter, and at the same time keep fueling the war in Europe. The increasing alignment of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran seeks to undermine the democratic norms and values we hold dear. This requires a united, strong response. And that is why we are investing more time and energy in military cooperation, interoperability, and exchange of knowledge and expertise with our partners. Yesterday and today, we explicitly looked at how we can tackle pervasive instability around the globe together, and how we can strengthen one another. And this goes especially for our relationship with Ukraine. Today, Allied Chiefs of Defense spoke at length with their Ukrainian counterpart, General Alexander Syrsky. We have reaffirmed that NATO will do everything it can to help and invest in Ukraine for years to come, whilst protecting the international rules-based order, including through the security assistance and training for Ukraine and the Joint Analysis Training and Education Center. It is in the political and military interest of the alliance to support Ukraine not only now, but also in the future. We are showing the world that democracy can and will win, and that democracy is worth fighting for. Ladies and gentlemen, collective defense is truly a task for the collective. It requires allies standing side by side. It requires active cooperation with partners. And it requires active participation from our whole societies, including the private sector. I'm confident that we have it within ourselves to make the changes that are necessary and ramp up our resilience. And with that, I would like to give the floor to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Cavoli. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rob. Good evening, everybody. It's great to have an opportunity to speak with you after the productive sessions we had here this week. They were especially beneficial, as Admiral Bauer pointed out, because our partners, not just our allies, were present. But first of all, before I begin, this is Admiral Bauer's final CHOD session with the military committee, and He's in his last days here in his position as the chair of the military committee, and I would like to publicly recognize him and thank him for his service, both to his home nation of the Netherlands and to this great alliance. Over the past 3.5 years as the CMC, he has been a terrific leader. He's been a great friend. Rob has overseen profound change within NATO, and in large part because of his efforts, the alliance is in the strongest place it's been in more than 40 years. And I would just like to express my deep professional respect and personal admiration for you and the work you've done here, Rob.
Thank you, Chris.
So since we've reoriented Allied Command operations onto collective defense, something we've spoken about before, the transformation has been remarkable. We've used our regional plans as the foundation, and we have driven fundamental changes to our structures, to our processes, and to our procedures. This system of collective defense that we set out to modernize is now largely in place, and we're focused on increasing and ever improving our readiness within that system. So in this upcoming year, we will have a rigorous exercise program to enhance our readiness. Allied Command Operations has nearly 100 separate exercises planned in 2025. To highlight just a few, this month, an exercise called Steadfast Dart is training our ability to mobilize the new Allied Reaction Force led by Italy, by Lieutenant General Lorenzo D'Addario. In May, Steadfast Deterrence will test SHAPE's capability as a strategic warfighting headquarters, and there are 8 distinct events in 2025 that will rehearse scaling up our forward land forces, the multinational battle groups, up to brigade size. This is an intensive schedule. It's ambitious, but it's absolutely necessary so that we can make sure our forces are trained and ready to defend our citizens. One example of how we are actively defending our citizens with operations is our response to the recent undersea cables damaged in the Baltic Sea. ACO, under my authorities granted to me by the North Atlantic Council as SACIR, ACO commenced a new multi-domain enhanced vigilance activity called Baltic Sentry. Whilst we're doing this exercise, we're also strengthening our military presence in the Baltic Sea to address potential threats and to deter any future destabilizing actions. Finally, as officially announced last month, NATO security assistance and training for Ukraine and SATU has begun to assume responsibilities from the International Donor Coordination Center in Wiesbaden, Germany. This new headquarters is streamlining international support to Ukraine, and it will help Ukraine achieve full interoperability within NATO standards. So I have many thanks for the nations for quickly sending their personnel to stand up in SATU. It was stood up in near record time, and now we are assuming the missions to defend the logistic enabling nodes across the eastern flank of our alliance. Just last week, I returned from a visit to Kiev alongside Lieutenant General Buzzard, the general officer who commands in SATU. We held very productive conversations with Minister Umierov and with General Syrski, the commander-in-chief, the supreme commander of the Ukrainian military. Together, we're putting Ukraine in the best possible position for its future. So thank you all very much. I look forward to your questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity for the first time to speak to you as SACTI. So I'm new in the position. I arrived in September, and so I just written my 90 days letter sent to the SecGen before December. First, I'd like to thank you, Rob, for what you're doing and what you have done among the CMC, making the three of us being one. And I think it's a powerful moment for the Alliance, having the three commanders which are just acting as one. Nothing else we do is not known by the two others, and so it's very important, and it gives us momentum in the alliance. In a CT perspective, I'm feeling strongly that we are in a race. We've launched a race. We are in a race. It's a war-fighting race. That means that we are racing to adapt, to transform, to invent in order to outpace the enemy, to be quicker than him. And as we see it in Ukraine, we are facing new military tools. The example of a country, Ukraine, that is be able to set a full denial of the Black Sea and which is in a strong attrition game against Russian Navy is a good example of what is going on in the new warfighting perspective. My first task is to support Ukraine, as the others do, and ACO with INSATU. I'm doing that with JADEC. JADEC has been approved by the NAC, the Council, on December 16th, and will be launched on mid-February. And so we'll give there in Bydgoszcz in Poland the first tools to make this center work. So JADEC is about merging the best of NATO warfighting experience with civilian experience, because it's a military civilian center in contact with Ukraine issues with their long-lasting efforts to prevail. So it's a long-term effort, and we will bring some programs, some of them will be secret, in order to develop skills, capabilities in order to prevail. And that will bring to NATO enterprise a strong military experience from Ukraine. And so it will benefit to both. So as I said, new tech is coming in the field, meaning new space. And you've seen how Ukraine used new space for their operations, robotics, unmanned, AI, quantum, and the list is bigger. And so my job as ACT is to be sure that what we have prepared for tonight still fits for tomorrow, means in 1 year, in 4 years, in 10 years. And so that we will still have a military edge. We need to keep our military edge that are to have the best stuff, to have the best tactics and concept, to have the best training, and to have the best adaptation DNA. I think it's the most important thing. And so it's a speed adaptation game. To do that, I have two tools which are in my hand. The first one is the NDPP, so the NATO Defense Planning Process. We are in the phase 3, and we are a moment where I've been given the task to translate SECURE's plans to capabilities and then to discuss capacities with the nations. And so the SecGen has asked me to accelerate the process in order to be able to put the capability targets on approval before the next summit. And so things are going well. We have 50% of the results. And so that will be given to the minister to approved not later than May. The point is, with the NDPP and this cycle, it's giving strong visibility to industry. And so it's something that didn't happen since decades. So now all the 32 members and the European one will have a plan saying, I will fulfill these capability targets. And so then they can go to industry, say what they will do in the future. So NDPP is a sort of market accelerator. And so it's very good for industry. It's an important moment. The second point is innovation. And so with the SecGen team, ACT is to experiment new things that we will bring as quick as possible to warfighters. So I can give you some examples. We've been given the task to evaluate acoustic sensing, so it's complements to the radar. And we've tested this in a matter of 6 months. In a NATO country, and we've proved that this kind of stuff can be connected to a NATO air picture. The second range is that we will work on the operational USV experimentation for the Baltic in support of the Operation Baltic Sentry that has been decided this week. It's a totally new approach of capabilities with which we will try to do things different and to learn quicker. And so back to the innovation we are launching, it's not only about new magic guns or things which are about technology. It's a new way to do things. It's not specification-centric, but it's warfighter-centric. So it goes directly to the warfighters. It's not long-term. It's immediate and short-term delivery. It's not immediately perfect, but it's adaptable. It's incremental. It's not about small numbers. It's give the possibility to be scalable at mass. and it's software-centric. And so it's what we bring in the NATO enterprise. So we have all of us, with the plans and the innovation and the will and the support of the 32 nations, the means to succeed. And the question is a question of speed. We need to act fast and smartly. And so in these turbulent times, ACT's job is to provide the warfighters with the quickest and the best warfighting tools. Time is paramount. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we are ready to take your questions. And for the transcript, I kindly ask you to state your name and outlets. We will start in the center, in the back row. Askanus, yeah.
Thank you. I have a question for...
Name and outlet, please.
Sorry, Cristina Giuliano, Asca News. I have a question for Generale Cavoli. It's about first of all, the contribution of Italy for NATO effort. I would like your assessment. And then about Baltic Sentry. Given that Baltic Sentry is an operation of deterrence, I would like to understand if what's going to be if something happened like what happened on Christmas, and then it could be replicated in other seas, like, for example, Mediterranean Sea. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. First of all, Italy's contributions are extremely important to the alliance, and in some cases they are one of a kind. First of all, Italy rapidly moved to the front to establish, as the framework nation, the battle group in Bulgaria. So Italy has established the framework for a brigade-sized battle group in Bulgaria, has had soldiers deployed to Bulgaria in cooperation with other NATO nations for almost 2 years now. Italy has already staged an exercise to raise that force up to brigade level, and we're very grateful for that, and I'm sure Bulgaria is also. Second, Italy has continued to contribute to air policing, especially in the Balkans area, and in some cases has actually provided the majority of air policing for other nations inside the alliance. In this regard, it's very useful that Italy has rapidly moved into 5th generation aircraft, in this case the F-35, and so they're able to conduct these air policing missions at the very cutting edge of military capability, and we're grateful for that. In the maritime domain, Italy, of course, given its geographical location and its historical activities in the Mediterranean Sea, Italy is a significant contributor to all of our maritime options and operations in the Mediterranean. It would be too numerous. The examples would be too numerous for me even to state. But finally, I'd like to call special attention to Italy volunteering to be the first nation to assume and bring to full operational capability the Allied Reaction Force. It's a new force that's designed as my swing force, my force in waiting to handle out-of-area operations, unexpected contingencies that do not fall within the regional plans, or even to add reinforcements in specific locations to the regional plans. Italy, under the NATO Rapid Deployment Corps located in Solbiate near Milano, and under the command of Lorenzo Daddario, General Daddario, has done an absolutely spectacular job of bringing nations together and creating a rapidly deployable, responsive unit that has already proven its worth in exercises in the Balkans and will soon continue to do so in other locations. So Italy's contributions, as with so many of our allies, are significant, even though they do not make the headlines every day. With regard to Baltic Sentry in many ways will illustrate the challenges of defending critical national infrastructure. As you know, there are complications of jurisdiction when we talk about national infrastructure. Some of it is national, some of it is commercial, some of it is in national waters, some of it is in international waters. So there's a complicated mix of authorities that belong to ministries of the interior, coast guards, police, international organizations, commercial organizations, and in each case we work very carefully with the relevant authority to share information and to give an understanding of what is happening on the sea and in the sea, and that is the principal function that we're performing up there. I hope that was helpful.
If I can add some comments on the Baltic Sentry. So it's the first time we'll give an ad to the military, I would say, conventional answer by bringing some new stuff in the debate. And so it will be the USV initiative. So that exists. It has been tested and used by the US, especially in the Persian Gulf. And so the idea is to replicate what has been learned by one of our major partners, which is the US, in a NATO operation. And so ACT will bring some new vehicles at speed of light, so I expect in less than few weeks, bring that to Markham and then begin to use this stuff, these ships, to give persistent 24/7 surveillance of critical areas. And then with the 8 countries of the Baltic, they will give us, to NATO, their own drones, and we will federate in a single network all the picture, all the video, the IAS picture or the radar picture, and then to spread it out to all stakeholders. So it will give quicker forensic and quicker hints for action for the multiple stakeholders, whether they are industry or Coast Guard or national police or whatever. And so it's the first time we bring this as an operational experiment in answer to an operational problem.
Next question is on the right side here, I believe Le Monde. Yeah, if you can state your name, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Elise Vincent, I work for Le Monde, the French daily newspaper. I have 2 questions for all of 3 of you. You will decide who is supposed to answer that. Okay, perfect. So I've listened to you and you keep repeating more or less that you, the Alliance has to do more and quicker. But we can see now there is a rapprochement between Turkey and Russia on the Syrian theater, which may worry some specialists. And how do you consider the potential impact of this rapprochement? Can it disturb the movement of going faster and quicker for the Alliance? First question. And the second question is regarding the defense spending. Mr. Rutte keep repeating the last weeks that we need to spend more, or the countries of the Alliance has to spend more. And he was comparing the need to spend as we, sorry, my English is, I'm tired, but to spend as during the Cold War era. And do you think we really therefore enter a new era of Cold War? Thank you.
Okay. Let me start with the second one. I think it's an old sticker, the Cold War, and it doesn't fit on what we do. Because what we have done in the last couple of years is to look at the present threat of Russia, and as a result our military plans have been written towards or against that threat, Russia and the terrorist groups. And the consequence of that work was that we now know what we need collectively to deter and defend against those threats, which is Russia and the terrorist groups. And what we collectively need is basically, let's say, the shield that the alliance has to have. And then we basically, in the work of the NATO defense planning process, we look at what does every ally have to do to make up collectively that shield. So we divvy up all the capabilities that we need amongst the allies in order to make sure that collectively we have what we need. That is the capability targets discussion. And so we know as a result of that work that it is a lot and that it costs more than 2%. And so the Secretary General's call for spending more is connected to basically that we know what we need in the coming years and that we know that that will cost more than 2%. And it's not the Cold War. It's, as I say, that's an old sticker that we try to put on the new work that is based on Russia, not the Soviet Union, not the Warsaw Pact. It is Russia and the terrorist groups. So I think that is one. And if that number of spending is close to what we spent in the period of the Cold War, might be something else. But it's not the same. So I think that is important to say. Second, on Turkey and Russia, we haven't talked about that. It doesn't have any consequences of what Turkey agrees within the alliance on doing more to actually deter and defend against Russia, because all these decisions are taken with consensus, so with Turkey. So this is not hampering the work within the alliance. Whatever discussions a nation has with Russia, with China, whatever, this is the work that we do within the alliance, agreed against the agreed threat, which is Russia. So Turkey is not having a different stance when it comes to what we need to do against the Russian threat.
If I would add something on your Cold War perspective. So NDPP is the first time for quite a long time that the pledge of the nations is plans related. So it's the plans that dictate what we need, and not a sort of a pledge for a sort of an ambition. It's just to fulfill a plan. And so what will be decided in May is say, yes, the plan has been approved by the nations, and then now they need to approve the means to do the plans actionable. They are actionable, but they need to be on the future. The needs in the future, and so it was my first point, they will need to be adapted because things are changing, because it's war, it's technology, and so we will be able to change the targets with technology. In the NDPP process, the first time that we give the opportunity for the nations to adapt their targets with technology. So if, for example, they say we give less tanks, but we give a mix of tanks and drones, then we will calculate in our system with our simulators what kind of effect they can deliver, and then we'll say, yes, you can do that. And so it's a process which is not just pledging for tanks, ships, and aircraft. It's just a way to fill the plans and say what the effects that are asked, and then we will fulfill this. And then, which is new, and so it's a reference to Cold War, we are in the era of dual use. Everything is dual. It's what Secure told you about critical infrastructure. It's both military, civilian, and national, international. And so you can see that on the sea, you can see on land, and you can see on space. Most of the critical infrastructure in space are civilian. And so all that questions that are driven by the NDPP is something which is new and didn't happen during the Cold War.
So I know that we have a lot more questions. I also know that we're almost running out of time. So let's try to squeeze as many in as we possibly can. Let's start over here, and then we'll try to get to all of you, but we'll have to keep it short.
Thanks a lot. Max Delaney, AFP. I'll talk quickly. A question for General Bauer and General Cavoli, Admiral Bauer, sorry. To begin with, you've both been played vital roles in NATO's efforts to support Ukraine. How could you give Ukraine, in the meeting you just had, any reassurances that NATO will be there to put it in a position of strength when you have no visibility beyond Monday, when Donald Trump will be inaugurated, about US support for Ukraine? And then second question on another issue. One of my AFP colleagues was in an airplane in a French aircraft over the Baltic Sea yesterday, which was targeted by Russian fire control system and attempted jamming. How serious was this specific incident, and how common is that sort of incident in the surveillance over the Baltic? Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. First of all, with regard to NATO support for Ukraine is enduring. It's enduring for a few reasons. The first reason is that it's the express political intention of the nations of this alliance to continue to support Ukraine. The second reason is because we've actually established structures to do it. We have infrastructure, we have people assigned, and SATU is a headquarters. It's a significant headquarters. NATO has already assumed responsibility to defend the logistics enabling nodes, which is a very complicated operation, a very sophisticated military operation. You will note that it was put into execution just the other day for the first time when some Russian drones were flying over Ukraine and were headed in the direction of Poland. Our airborne early warning and our other systems detected these. We launched F-35s. In this case, they were from Norway. And in conjunction with ground-based control, ground-based radars, and other devices, they were able to get a good lock on these drones, and we're prepared to deal with them should they have come into NATO airspace. They, of course, did not, but this involved everything from ground alert to ground-based air defense to air-to-air refueling, very complicated operations. We'll be doing that weekly, I'm sure, multiple times weekly. So we've put into place procedures and institutions that are designed to endure. So I'm not very worried about NATO's continuous contribution and support for Ukraine. Your other question was about electromagnetic interference. I don't want to talk about the specific case that you're talking about, but in general, I think we can say that it is widespread. It is affecting not just it is affecting all types of air traffic, and it is something that is quite serious. It goes far beyond the borders of Europe as well, and so I do confirm that.
I think it's important to share with you that the meeting with General Sirski is a meeting between him and 32 allied chiefs of defense, and those chiefs of defense have visited Ukraine several times in the last couple of years. And so that is a personal relationship as well. It's not just a distant figure in Ukraine that we're talking to. This is someone we know personally. This is someone there's mutual trust. And this is about professionals talking about what he needs, what we will be able to do, of course, within the political limitations that our governments all impose on whatever happens. And as General Cavoli says, the framework after Washington is to transfer some of the things that were organized by the US now into NATO. The SEG-U, the IDCC, those were, that was a group of nations helping Ukraine. Now NATO is taking over that responsibility. And the United States has agreed to that. And that doesn't change on Monday. So I think the enduring contributions and the enduring mechanisms that are now in place is something that is reassuring for someone like General Sirski. Because for him, the war doesn't change because of what happens in the White House. The war is there on Monday as well. And so he needs continued help. And we all agree, as the Secretary General has said, that we need to ensure that Ukraine is put in the strongest possible position for the moment when there is going to be negotiations. And until that time, we will have to continue to support Ukraine with everything we have in order to make sure that they can continue their fight against Russia.
It might be useful to point out also, Rob, that the nations of NATO took the decision to assume these responsibilities months ago. They took the decision formally at the Washington summit, and it was part of the summit communique. So that's a...
Okay, we'll go to Reuters next, and then we'll go to that side of the room, which I have neglected. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Andrew Gray from Reuters. Following up and staying with Ukraine, what's your current assessment of the state of the war, and what can NATO allies do right now or in the weeks and months to come to put Ukraine in that position of strength that you're talking about? What do they need most? What can allies provide?
I think it's important to explain that the war is, I mean, it's a long war. We're approaching the 3-year mark of this war, which was supposed to be a 3-day war, if you listen to Mr. Putin. Both sides are in a difficult position. I mean, the war takes its toll on human beings, on materiel, on infrastructure, everything. So both sides basically deal with the similar problems. They have to find new soldiers, they have to train them, they have to find equipment, they have to find weapon systems and ammunition. That is an ongoing effort on both sides. That is one. Secondly, despite the fact that the Russians have the initiative and are trying to, are attacking the Ukrainians on a daily basis on different points along the front, they are making very slow progress, and it costs them heavily. We're talking about 700,000 wounded and killed soldiers on the Russian side in 3 years' time. That's a huge number. And so we see that it is difficult for both sides, and that of course, and then on the Ukrainian side, the front is not collapsing. Ukraine is still in the Kursk region. And so there is, and the Russians basically have not achieved any of their strategic objectives. None. So you cannot say only that the Ukrainians have a difficult time, the Russians have a difficult time as well. And so what Ukraine needs is basically the things they are asking for a longer time, and that is air defense, that is artillery, that is, of course, a replacement for the weapons and the weapon systems that are destroyed in a war. It is armored vehicles, it is tanks, it is all the things that are used are being destroyed. And of course, for the new units that they are working on and trying to form based on the recruits that they are training with our help, they need to equip those forces as well. So it is a constant, it's not like a new list of things he's asking for, it is a continuous list which is the result of a war because of the ammunition used, the lives lost, because of the material that is destroyed. But the Russians have exactly the same problems. And we see that the numbers are bigger on the Russian side, but the quality goes down there. And the Ukrainians, with smaller numbers, are still focusing on quality with our training, our weapon systems, our ammunition.
And Satyu is in daily communication with our Ukrainian colleagues and has a very detailed understanding of what they require at any given time. There are Ukrainian officers inside in Satyu who help us with that understanding as well. So it's a very close relationship. Obviously, the details of what they need, we should probably not discuss, but I'm very confident we understand what they need and that allies have the opportunity to provide.
Okay, we will go to the left over there, middle row.
Thank you. Bin Na Chung from Yonhap News Agency, South Korea. I have a question for Admiral Bauer. So regarding the North Korean troops, we have seen reports that the Ukrainian army have captured some of the soldiers alive. What is your latest assessment? Are they like, are they just like being used as a human shield, or are they actually having some impact in the battlefield? And I have another question, if I may. You have been mentioning China not only today, but also yesterday in your opening remarks. So I know that all of the representatives from IP4 countries have been attending this meeting. In what particular aspects or field that are you looking into to have some cooperation in military terms regarding this backdrop? Thank you.
Okay, on the DPRK, I mean, it is still amazing that one of the most isolated countries in the world, North Korea, is now suddenly a player. And that is not only allowed by Russia because they need them for first their artillery ammunition and the missiles, but now also for troops. And but it is also fascinating that China is basically allowing this to happen. So both China and Russia have stopped supporting the UN in terms of the Security Council resolutions on North Korea with regard to the missiles and the nuclear program. That is a huge change. It's a huge change that North Korea, the most isolated country in the world, now suddenly is a player. And the result of that they are in Europe fighting for the Russians, means that the Indo-Pacific is now suddenly connected to the European theater in a way that nobody thought for possible. That has huge consequences. So solving the conflict in Ukraine is not only about Ukraine and Russia. It is now also about North Korea. It is also about Iran. It's also about China. So it complicates the finding a solution, I think. It makes it more complex, at least. And secondly, I think it was a strategic mistake to have North Korea involved in this way. And so in terms of how good are those soldiers, how are they used, and what do we see? We know it's about 11,000 soldiers that are in the Kursk region, used by the Russians. What we basically now hear is also from the Ukrainians is that about a third of those is wounded and killed, and actually they are used in a not very effective way because there is a language problem with the Russians. So coordination between the Russians and the North Koreans is actually not really possible, and they are not necessarily used in a very favorable positions by the Russians. So they are not necessarily used as a shield or whatever, but they are used in a way where a lot of them will die, and so it is. And yes, I saw those soldiers that were captured as well, that were questioned. So that will give the Ukrainians information on how they are used and how effective they see themselves. So that is that. On China, as I explained, there's a lot of things that is being very openly done by North Korea. I mean, giving weapons, selling weapons. I mean, by the way, the Russians are giving now weapons to North Korea that are seen in the Korean Peninsula, and that is therefore a problem for the Republic of Korea, but also for the U.S. which has troops there as well. So it increases the problem set not only in Ukraine but in a wider perspective. And China is basically ensuring that Russia remains in the fight with everything the Russians need to build weapons. They don't give weapons, but it's microprocessors, it is raw materials, all the things the Russians need for mass production in the defense industry come to a great extent from China. So they play a role, and we have said to China, you can't have it both ways. I mean, you can't say you want to be friends with us and trade and with the Europeans and the Americans, and at the same time fuel a war in Europe. That's not good. And the Russian-Chinese relationship is very unclear what it leads to, but the implications of that relationship in the longer term is also, of course, of great concern.
I'm afraid we only have time for one final question. I'm very, very sorry. I'm going to give it to Terry Schultz.
You're sorry you're giving it to me?
No.
Sorry, my voice is not good, guys. Okay, I'm going to give one to each of them because Leo can't get mad at me anymore. First, of course, Admiral Bauer. I'm thinking back to a year ago when we were here exactly at this press conference and giving you a chance to reminisce a little bit. At that time, I asked you about the Swedish call for prepare for war to its citizens, and you said you hoped that other countries would train their own citizens in this way. Have you seen that sort of urgency picked up among other countries in the alliance, preparing society for, I mean, not just possible war, but also potentially natural disasters? And the other thing you said was that the industry had to stop being just, what did you say, just enough, just in time. I think that was your statement. General Cavoli, you said that you were quite confident that no matter what happens with the Trump administration, Ukraine's supply would be okay. But what about your own situation with the family of plans? You have organized everything to such great detail. Not that I've seen it, obviously, but so we hear. Are you worried that if the U.S. pulls back even a little bit, it will disturb the balance that you've created in these new plans? And Admiral Van Dier, the United States, the Biden administration, we're all worried about Trump tariffs. They have just decided that many NATO allies, the Eastern Europeans, will have a limit on how many microchips they can buy, AI microchips, because they're worried about China's weapons industry. But what does that do to innovation in the alliance? Is this something you're worried about? Thank you.
Okay. On the preparations for war, it's the call that SecGen put out there a couple of weeks ago in his speech for Carnegie Europe. It is what I said a year ago. I think it's a very old saying: if you want peace, prepare for war. And I think it is exactly what we need to do. And then people call me a warmonger, but actually it's the opposite. The fact that if you prepare for war in the right way, then you are deterring your enemies better. And if you deter your enemies better, then the chance there will be war goes down. So it's not, let's say, a plea for war, it is a plea for peace. And that requires investments on a much wider scale than just the armed forces. Because if you look at deterrence, it is also about energy security, it's about food security, it is about the resilience of the people, that societies think about the fact that in a crisis you need new soldiers after a couple of days. It's not only about new grenades and new tanks, it's also about new soldiers. So you have to think about a system where you are resilient. And if you all have arranged that, it's about raw materials, that you are not dependent on one nation only, like we saw with Russia, gas and oil, like we see now with China when it comes to raw materials for renewable energy or for certain medicines. We are heavily dependent on China. I think it's not good. I'm not against China, but it's not good. We are depending on one nation for those supplies. So all that, if you take that into account, we need to do much more. Your question was, is that happening? I see it happening more and more. There is more and more discussion about it, not only in Sweden. It is happening in the Scandinavian nations for a longer time. The discussions in Germany are happening. In my own nation, there is more discussion on this. So I think this is important to build up the societal resilience. That's one. And industry is part of that. Industry is part of societal resilience. And the just-in-time, just-enough economies we have created over the last 40 years is not enough for a pandemic and not enough for a war. We need to be able to respond to peak demand signals. And that's not the case. Now, we have to increase our own defense capacity. That's one. And at the same time, we can help Ukraine by investing in the capacity that is available in Ukraine, by investing with money to make that capacity that is there work for them, because what they lack is money and not the capacity itself. They have the factories, but they need the money for the raw materials, etc. So I think that is something we are looking at as an alliance or as allies as well, and the combination will improve. But it is something we need to work on for many more years to improve our societal resilience.
And you wanted to say you'll miss us, right?
Say again?
You wanted to say you'll miss us?
I will miss you all. I will miss you all. This is the highlight of my year every time.
Sure. So the United States contribution to the regional plans is very significant. It's a national commitment. It's there. It's strong. I don't want to talk about exactly what it is, of course, or the exact numbers of the plan, but it's a substantial pledge. It would be irresponsible to, speculate about what a future administration might do hypothetically, so I won't do that. But I will point out that the plans are designed to be flexible and to accept the forces that are made available. I have to say, though, that there seems to be sometimes a misperception that the U.S. provides everything and other nations come along. It's simply not. That is not the case in these plans. The U.S. provides a relevant amount of force in them, but that's all. I would call attention, to current operations. So we talked about Baltic Sentry a few minutes ago. It took me, less than 24 hours to examine the situation and to make a decision under authorities granted to me by the North Atlantic Council as SACIR that we needed to do something about it. It took 3 days or so to plan it out and to get the first contributions, and then it took a day or so to sail the assets into place. In less than a week, we were up and operating in the Baltics. There's not a single U.S. contribution to that. I think I'm the only U.S. contribution to it, in fact. So this is an alliance that is not a one-trick pony. This is an alliance that is capable of doing things and is rapidly gaining the ability to do more and more. In the future, it will continue to defend on the defense spending we talked about earlier and on the industrial production that Admiral Bauer just talked about. Thanks.
Yes, on AI, it's a very big question because we know that will modify the way we fight. And so the concerns of the US administration about this are clearly the good ones because it's about military edge. So we can say that AI is in the 4 stages of the action loop. Perhaps you know that the OODA loop, which is observe, orient, decide and act. And so it's the constant loop we're turning all the day. Observe is about using AI with mass data processing, and especially in intel. When you are, for example, in space, you produce millions of pixels during 1 hour, then you need AI to process to help the operators to recognize what's going on. And so it gives quicker and more relevant picture. On the orient phase, it's where you prepare a decision for a boss and then extensive use of LLMs give you being faster, clearer orders, faster adaptation. On the decide side, you will use AI to simulate, to war game, to model, and then to test your scenario and say, is this the good answer I'm good at putting in the field? And then to the act, it's the use of AI in embarked systems. You know, for example, that having some loyal wingmen for the fighters or piloting some swarms of drones, whether they are land, surface, or air, will require use of AI. So it's a critical question. And so this year, I sent a letter a week ago to the chief of the military committee, proposing him to have an AI champion in ACT. And I can tell you already that I have some discussions with some nations about implementing AI tools in their system. And so ACT will be a matter of discussion because we are in the US. We are in a close discussion with the US military. And so we're able to bring the understanding of this tech and then to find solutions for the alliance. Thank you.
What about the allies that are no longer going to have access to buy as many microchips as they want from the US?
AI is not just about having some microchips. You have some frugal AI. So in fact, the difficulty for AI is to build it. And so it requests a large number of computers and chips. But once it's done, it doesn't request so much computers. You have AI in your pocket with your what you have in your smartphone. You can have ChatGPT and have some good stuff, AI, good use of AI. The question is to trust what the eye is giving to you. So I think for sure some countries will not be able to develop new solutions because they will not have access to the ships, but the products that will be developed within the islands will be for everybody.
That concludes this press conference. To give one more example of Italy's phenomenal contributions to the alliance, tomorrow Admiral Giuseppe Cavodragone will take over as chair of the NATO Military Committee. We wish him and his team nothing but the best, and thank you all for keeping us sharp these last couple of years. Thank you.